Hello everyone and welcome back to newearth.land. This is the first video on a playlist that I'm going to title The Logical Path to Enlightenment. It's going to run in conjunction with the main playlist, which is called The Path to Post-Capitalism. So these are two playlists that fall within the umbrella of the New Earth movement. And I didn't want to create a separate subject or a separate channel for this because I feel like they are fundamentally connected. um, we need to raise human consciousness before we can see some of the social solutions that I've outlined at newearth.land. And we need to bring people together. So the more material that is of interest to people who want to raise their awareness, both on a social, secular level, but also on a universal, cosmic and philosophical degree, um, I think that the two subjects and two playlists can work hand in hand. Um, so anyway, this is the first video, and I thought we'd just crack straight into it um, with the subject of what consciousness actually is, because it's sort of astonishing, isn't it? It's something that we all are ultimately. It's something that we possess, and yet rarely, even though without it we're nothing, we don't discuss it anywhere near to the degree that we discuss some of these more earthly subjects. So, the amazing truth about you, video number one, what is consciousness? So the first slide here and the first question that really we need to answer to understand what it is to ask ourselves, well, what anything is at all. So here, for example, we see what we would call trees, but we know that the trees aren't made of wood. They are actually wood. We're looking at wood. And then the wood isn't made of carbon. We're actually looking at carbon. Carbon isn't made of atoms. It is atoms, and atoms aren't made of energy. They are actually energy. Like, this is energy that we're looking at. And this, of course, goes for anything we've ever experienced, whether you're walking down the street and you see a bin or another fellow human being, or a building or a cloud, whatever it is. What it breaks down to behind the barriers of language and almost behind the scenes of our, myopic human lens, is that everything is ultimately energy. And these things, albeit there's a variety of different configurations of what we call energy, and the labels that we use are of course important, when we look close enough behind our surface observations, we can see this ultimately, this atom. This is a micron photograph, I think, of a hydrogen atom. And, when we break it down, we can see that surrounding this is ultimately mostly empty space, which is very interesting indeed. And so the key point that I've made here from the outset of this video is that everything is energy, okay? Whether that is us, our pets, um, the door, the building that you're in, the universe, whatever. We need a word to describe this stuff that we experience, right? And of course, that's quite a general thing. But ultimately, when we break it down, like I say, behind the barriers of language, we can see that that is indeed the case. And so energy vibrates, and it vibrates in a number of different ways. But this is a sort of aerial plan view of a cymatic plate. So it's sort of a visual representation of the structures that sound creates. So if you sort of put sand on a vibrating plate and you range the frequencies up and down, kind of like this, exactly like that, what you'll see is these different formations appearing, and they get structured based on the note. But the point that I'm making here is that there is an invisible phenomenon occurring that's made apparent through this experiment. And so the phase states that we go through, or we see energy pass through, are solid. So, for example, bones and rocks. And this is, of course, very elemental stuff. So, um, and then, we might consider them to be slow vibrations, medium vibrations, what we might call liquids, blood and steam, gases like nitrogen and oxygen. And then we have fast vibrations, so fast that we can't even see them. So this is light, but here the light is actually invisible. We see only its source. And if there were, it's an object on this image, we would also not only see the source but the surface it shines on. So the actual phenomena, though, remains invisible, even though we have this tiny little bandwidth that we call visible spectrum. When you look into your room and you look at the wall or you look at your device that you're on right now, you can't see the light that's actually there between you and that object, right? That so-called object. And so, in that sense, the actual phenomenon itself, just like sound, is invisible beyond the scope of human perception. And that's not even to factor in all of the microwaves, the radio waves, the Wi-Fi, everything that's surrounding us right now. Something is occurring, and yet it is not apparent to the human eye, or indeed the human ear. And so, what we have here is, like I say, something that's invisible, but we know to be there. We see its effects, but we do not see its cause. And that could be a very much similarity between what we call light or high vibrations and consciousness. We encounter consciousness only when it interacts and manipulates matter. So we see all these majestic effects of consciousness. If you look through nature, we see amazing birds, beautiful flowers, an incredible array of flora and fauna that we can't quite grasp its source for. Where do these things come from? What has actually happened and what's taken place here? Do we conceive or receive consciousness? So that is to say, almost that what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, do brains, like the sort of Western materialist perspective goes that we were sort of trained with throughout school? This is a general worldview that matter, uh, once it's somehow randomly organized, it starts to be configured in such a way that slowly a consciousness emerges, and it's very much a localized phenomena that exists solely within the cranium of these physiological organisms, even though that we know that to a certain extent, certain plants, for example, that don't have these neurological systems have some degree of consciousness. And so the question really is here, where does this come from? And this leads us to the ocean floor, where scientists typically, there's a consensus that this is where biological life began, and the operative word there is biological life. So again, this is when consciousness impresses upon matter, and we say, hey, there it is. There is this matter being manipulated by intelligence. And so what's happening here is incredible white hot heat is being ejected from the magma under the crust of the ocean into the cool, dark depths of the sea. And somehow this creates this kind of crucible of sort of theatrical experience of these extreme contrasting degrees in temperature that somehow bestow upon the surfaces of those geothermal vent shafts, they're called, life forms, like tiny little microbes and things that we can all see, have, and possess some degree of life. And so Wilhelm Reich, the Austrian psychoanalyst and doctor of medicine, um, recreated this condition in test tubes and sterilized test tubes. So he got materials like sand, iron filings, coal that were completely inert and pasteurized. And he would simply recreate the condition on the ocean floor. So he would heat these things up and then cool them down rapidly. And within seconds, amazingly, what we saw is these sort of formations. So this very much within the space of a few seconds, once the material is cooled down, we saw these formations that were created from what he called these blue glowing type structures called bions. And then within seconds, they would form brain-like structures. Here we clearly see something that's animated and moving in its own right. Just like how I can take my hand now and say, I want to move it here and I want to move it up here. These things possess that locomotion. And so that's just one of the structures. This one here Again, all created spontaneously within seconds of inert materials being activated seemingly through this degree of contrasting temperatures. Clearly, this structure here is along the lines of self-defense in terms of its purpose. We can see that that is quite a familiar structure there from microbes. Um, and then here we have what looks like a red blood cell or a white blood cell, sorry, a leukocyte, which has a mouth seemingly. Like this thing has formed a mouth again within seconds, and it's got a goal. This is the point. Within the seconds that this thing has been manufactured, it seemingly has a goal, and it's to consume things and to extend its experience, its life. Here is a structure that clearly has been created by some degree of intelligence or consciousness. This isn't a random formation. You know, if I were to create that in architecture school, for example, I'd get a round of applause, and yet we seemingly forget to offer a similar applause to whoever or whatever has created this. And we'll get on to kind of what that is. But here is what one that kind of resembles a red blood cell. Um, and so these are not unfamiliar to us, and yet they're created spontaneously within seconds. And I feel like this can lead us to, I think, a fair conclusion, which is that what we call air, what we call um, this Cartesian space that surrounds us all, that we think of as just dead space and time, like somehow that we're just consciousness is solely in the brain, that we just conceive that consciousness and it's held within the body and exists not without us or without outside ourselves, but only within ourselves, and it follows through. But what if that is sort of an impouring from something that's actually infinite? And what if consciousness, like I've written here, is an inherent quality and condition of energy? That consciousness is everywhere, that mind is everywhere, that all is mind, the universe is mental. What if that is a possibility? And I'd say absolutely that is the case. And this is what our Hermetic Freemasonic traditions allude to, and a lot of the esoteric circles, they know this, you see. And when you look at the experiments of Wilhelm Reich, you can see how these life forms and these structures that are elaborate, they're not random, they're not chaotic, they're not these sort of like these mute formations void of intelligence. Somehow they've been formed, and I say that they've been formed from the very fabric of existence and life itself, life being not something that we possess, but something we participate in. So consciousness is life. Life is energy. Energy is consciousness. They're all interchangeable terms. And if we're not going to have the knee-jerk reactions, we can also throw God into the equation, because God equals consciousness. It's just another word that's been used in religious circles. But what we have to understand is that this consciousness is an infinite field of awareness, that it is the fabric of time. It is the fabric of space itself. It's a quality, just like we can look at something and say a quality of it is that it's shiny or it's dry or it's wet. We can also say, to a certain degree, based on its vibration, that it's conscious. As we look around, we see most inanimate objects not bestowing or not holding much consciousness. But as our bodies are like a bridge between these different vibrations, between solid, between liquid, between gas, and between the neurological systems and light, we can see that we're bridging this unbounded field of awareness, and that we're only receiving these things. And indeed, that's what Kabbalah is means. It means correct receptions. Okay, so that, in a nutshell, is a presentation on the nature of consciousness. And I'm trying to keep these videos quick, so we can't go into too much detail on in each video. But I think what we'll do next is we'll talk about levels of consciousness and how we can reach those levels of consciousness, so that we can ultimately raise our awareness, raise our intelligence, so that we can move into a better world and move out of this Kali Yuga and go forwards into more blissful, joyful, happy experiences on this planet. So yeah, stick around for that video and check out newearth.land to learn more about what we're doing, which is ultimately making shelter, energy, food, and water human rights. Okay, we can do that if we come together. That's all that's required. You can see that in more detail. I won't talk about this here, but at newearth.land. So that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.